What's up, everybody? Lou from Hypocritic here, and we've got a special one for you now because we are sitting down with Fabian Rastorfer, the founder of Fabraz and the lead on none other than Bubsy 4D. Thanks so much for taking the time out here.
Hey, everyone. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's start off. We're going to cover a lot of ground here, I'm sure, but I want to kind of kick off from your perspective of how you sort of got into the position of game development in general and your sort of arc through the industry leading up to Bubsy 4D, clearly the culmination of everything up to this point. Right. So can you give us a little bit of a rundown on your own history as a game developer, how you ended up founding Fabraz and how your sort of presence in the industry kind of evolved?
Yeah, so we've been basically around now for a decade, and I started the company with friends, and basically we're still just a bunch of friends working together. But it all started around 10, 11 years ago in New York, and we first focused on mobile games. One of the first releases we did was Planet Diver. But then while we were working on Planet Diver, we also did a PC port, and we started realizing, you know what, that's actually more of our vibe, is going more into the PC console games, because that's also what we've been playing ourselves, more so than mobile games outside of commuting, of course. Sometimes, then you always have your commuting game. But with that, we're like, okay, then let's figure out a genre, and we decided to do a 2D platformer. And that was Slime Sand. And that was our first, I'd say, breakout success. A lot because of also being one of the first games that released on the Switch. I think it released within like month 4 of the Switch, so pretty early on. And that got us a lot of attention. And it was partially because I think already then we started experimenting with this concept of a move set that has enough complexity that you can kind of explore and do different types of moves in a level that are past just the standard. You can just jump and do a regular dash kind of thing, more combinatorial. And we had a lot of fun with Slime Sand, but we felt like we pretty much did everything we wanted to do with that game. And so we're like, okay, let's see, can we apply the same concepts into a 3D platformer? And that's when we made Demon Turf, where we teamed up with Playtonic as our publisher. And that was our first take on a 3D platformer. And there, by the end of it, we were very proud with what we made, and it's awesome seeing all the fans that we have, but we felt like we could do more with it. We felt like by the end of it, we're like, okay, now we have actually a better grip, a better understanding of the concept, and we want to do more. And so that's when we then decided to work on a semi-sequel called Demon Tides, and that's the game that we're currently also still working on, which is a big open world expressive platformer. We call it expressive for that concept of like, there's so many types of movement mechanics, combinatorial moves that you can express yourself through the movement. And that was kind of I think part of the reason why Atari also wanted to work with us, is seeing what we did with, or we're still doing with Demon Tides. And that led then eventually to Bubsy 4D. And here we are.
And here we are. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And that arc through it, I think you can very clearly draw the inspiration and the advancement in, your knowledge of what you're doing and how you're approaching the game design. The position of expressiveness, when in talking with Atari at PAX West, that was a term that came up a lot as well, expressive platformer. You see it across the Demon series, let's call it Demon Turf, Demon Tides, as well as now obviously with Bubsy 4D and what's been released of that so far. Can you talk about what that term really means from your perspective, and how maybe, with Bubsy as the most recent lens, how you bring that to life through all of its different elements, the mechanics, the gameplay, the visuals, the sound design and music, the voice acting, etc.
Yeah, and that's a really good way to put it, because that's the thing, is that like it is an amalgamation of different design philosophies that make it an expressive platformer. The easiest way for me to describe an expressive platformer without it sounding fancy is basically saying, how many different ways do I have to cross the same gap? And if it's 1 or 2 options, that's a standard platformer, and nothing wrong with that, by the way. Absolutely not saying that that's lesser of a platformer at all. But for the subgenre of an expressive platform, the answer has to be, there's a multitude of ways. And that's only possible if the moveset has enough complexity, enough depth, and enough combinatorial ways to allow you to do that. So like, let's say you have 3 moves, and the order of the moves dictates what kind of movement comes out of it, right? So in Demon Turf, for example, the best example there is you have a spin move that is very slow and usually is done for repositioning, and you have a double jump, which is a classic double jump. But if you double jump out of a spin, it suddenly becomes a super jump, and that gives you a ton of extra distance. And it's that in a multitude of ways, and that's the mechanical aspect. And then the level design aspect also has to accommodate that, where basically the player suddenly feels creative that way. They're incentivized to think, oh, what if I do a wall run jump here? What if I do a super jump here? What if I do a bat jump first? All these kind of things. And it makes the player feel like they can express themselves, and it makes them feel creative. And ideally, that eventually leads to that kind of like movement flow, where you're kind of just in the zone and you feel like you're just kind of moving through the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you have to do sort of world design to accommodate that, with Bubsy 4D, things like hairball mode and how much ground you can gain from, just one single jump, let's say. I imagine there has to be a lot of consideration when you're crafting worlds that balance your ability to go really far without breaking things.
Yeah.
Or making it feel like it's too easy to get around and you can sort of abuse it in that sense. So from a level design perspective, how do you balance having these really free roaming and very open feeling mechanics with level design that still needs to respect feeling like it's designed and a level?
Yeah. So there's several aspects to that. The first one, of course, is that like if you're keenly aware of a lot of the more advanced meta movement, then you test for that. And if you feel like, okay, now you're skipping too much and it's not fun, then you adjust the level design to not allow you to skip that way. But if it's fun, and most importantly for me, one of the vital parts is if it's difficult, then it's even more satisfying, right? Like if the normal route, or normal quote unquote, where you take it slow is easier, then that's a good balance to strike there oftentimes. The other thing that we do a lot is that and this is the case for Demon Tides, it's the case for Bubsy 4D, there's different incentives that you have and different goals you have in a level. And so obviously in Bubsy 4D, every level at the end has a goal to get. And there you obviously want to figure out the quickest, most efficient way. But then you also have 150 yarn bolts to collect. And those basically then means you have to engage with every aspect of the level because they're scattered throughout. And so that's also kind of creates basically different vibes of how you go through a level. So usually, and we kind of designed for that with the UI even, when you go into a level for the first time, there's no timer and you're just exploring the level, you're getting familiar with the layout, you're collecting everything. And then by the end, in the windscreen, you see what the expected time is. You retry the level. Now the GUI shows a timer, and you try to be as stylish and fast as possible.
That is so interesting how you sort of can ease the player into those sort of mechanics and the way you think about approaching these levels and approaching the mechanics and the objectives that are laid out. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Putting this entire project together, maybe reaching back a little bit, now I can't recall if Atari approached you or you approached Atari with this specific idea, but I know that they were looking for, unique and quality takes on a lot of these IPs, especially Bubsy, given the franchise's sort of reputation over the decades. So can you talk a little bit about how that initial planning process came together from your perspective, working with Atari to flesh out the concept, when you kind of got the green light to go after it, and what those sort of formative months looked like for the project?
Yeah, I guess let's start with how it came to be at all. Basically, it was kind of funny because I believe it was Wade from Atari who was in a podcast. I think it was the Min Max podcast, where he basically revealed that they have the Bubsy IP, and we're basically doing an open call to devs, like, hey, we're open to ideas. And I was keenly aware of that podcast appearance because literally the moment that clip hit the internet, we got tagged nonstop. Like, oh, Fabraz should do it. Oh, Fabraz would be amazing. Fabraz can suddenly make a good Bubsy game. Which of course is very flattering, but also it was just hilarious because I had no context outside of that. And so I even at the time, I think I put in like that Akira, leave me alone. But like, don't tag me about Bubsy anymore. But then a couple of days later, I did get an email from Atari saying like, hey, we're looking for pitches. Would you be interested in pitching us a game? And naturally, with all of that tagging from people, we were like, okay, this is kind of an interesting potential thing to look into. And so then we sent in the pitch. And I guess that's the second part of your question now in terms of the pitch itself. We had a couple of core pillar ideas. I mean, the first one was obviously we're bringing in another expressive platformer because that's a subgenre we're kind of pushing and exploring. But it was also, we looked at the previous attempts of reviving Bubsy. And I think it's really important to highlight that there's no dev team that goes out there wanting to make a bad game. And all of those games have something to them. But what we identified as something that didn't work for us in the two recent revivals was the insistence on making fun of itself way too much. Where basically Bubsy was constantly self-deprecating in terms of humor. And that's not who Bubsy was in the past, from what we could do see from research. And so we're like, okay, obviously the series is infamous, and there'll be moments where we make fun of it occasionally, but otherwise, let's just treat it with respect, and let's just try to make a good game and a fun world. And that was really a big part of the pitch in there, is that we basically focus on not becoming too self-deprecating. And then the last thing I think that was very attractive, of course, is that like we have with Demon Tides now built a very solid framework, a very solid foundation for making 3D platformers, where we basically can skip the first year of building all the basic systems because we have them in place. And that, of course, means that development time can almost be halved. And that's, of course, a very, very big attractive thing.
One thing that I've noticed that is appreciated so much from basically all sides of this is the earnestness with which the project is approaching the IP.
Yeah.
Like you had mentioned, a lot of the previous attempts were very self-deprecating and very sort of almost mean to the character and the
Right.
IP. But this idea of taking it seriously, of trying to produce, the genuinely the best game possible and respecting it at the same time really seems to have resonated with the broader community of people who, and there are many very passionate fans of the franchise out there who appreciate that level of effort. So can you talk a little bit about how important it was to maintain that earnestness in the approach throughout the development process and having that extend to the rest of it, the script, the voice acting, the presentation elements, and keeping that level of, let's say, seriousness, but earnestness and sort of that genuine nature of it throughout?
Yeah, for sure. Basically, what I always say is that like, there's a reason why Bubsy is still here, and it's something that people know. Because yeah, the infamy is there, but it can only carry you so far. It's because at the core, there are elements in all of these games. And Michael Berlin, who unfortunately passed away, the original creator, he really loved this character. And if you look at all of the games, you can feel it, you can see it. And so when we did our research, when we started on the project, the first thing we did is, as a team, we got together and we spent a night or two just playing all the previous games together and kind of like picking the things we like, picking the things we don't like, and kind of getting a creative board going. And we just realized that there's so much that you can pull out of there that is likable, and the things that aren't necessarily the most important part of the Bubsy identity. And then the other philosophy that we kind of realized is that, like, okay, because of the infamy, obviously we're fighting. There's a bit of an uphill battle, right? There's some people who are like, I can't possibly ever like Bubsy, and so we're like, how can we tackle that somehow? How can we get over that hump? And one of the realizations was like, let's embrace some of the infamy, not in a self-deprecating way, but in terms of like, time has passed and Bubsy is older now too. And so that was kind of, I think, one of the main things that worked so well with the trailer for everyone, is that like, he felt like a guy who he knows he has a history, and he's a little bit older now, he's a little bit more tired, but he's still earnest, he still wants to kind of do something cool. He still hasn't lost that like little spark. And so, yeah, just like that kind of concept of a comeback story, if you've got a 40-year-old bobcat trying to make it, is just endearing somehow, I think.
And it really has resonated throughout, seeing the response to the announcement and sort of, people wrapping their heads around it. I think Jason from Atari mentioned sort of the 3 stages of Bubsy 4D acceptance.
Right, exactly.
Sort of recognizing, oh my God, he's back. Oh, is this really good? Oh, apparently it is.
Yeah.
And sort of walking through that. What has that sort of experience been like from your perspective, now having worked on this game for a while, seeing it kind of get its legs out in the world, announcing it, having people react generally so positively to it, and with genuine enthusiasm, excitement for, we can't wait for this. From your perspective as a creator and a developer, what's that feel like?
It feels awesome. It feels amazing, of course. I mean, just seeing that outpour of love, all of the new fan art, of the new design, because obviously we definitely took some risks, and I can also really appreciate Atari for allowing us to take those risks. Because it's not easy to just say like, hey, by the way, let's remove the iconic shirt with the exclamation mark and give him a jacket and a tie that references the exclamation mark instead, because it just fits his older vibe better. But like, they were cool with it from pretty much the start. And so seeing people react that way is of course incredibly gratifying. The funny thing is that, like, while I was nervous, I wasn't as nervous as you might have thought. pre the release, just because the development of this game has been very smooth. There's been very few moments where our initial ideas that we concepted didn't work out and we had to pivot or anything like that. It was one of the most smoother development experiences that we've had. And so that gave me a little bit of confidence, also because I had that confidence in my team and I know that they're all awesome. But I, of course, didn't expect that kind of intense outpour of love. Like that has been a whole new level.
Yeah, it must be incredibly, incredibly gratifying. One other thing that I've noticed through, things that are posted from your perspective about the game and that people kind of latch onto is this emphasis on almost speedrunning and mechanics mastery. We had talked about sort of having this deep, high skill ceiling kind of move set that's very flexible and that you can, use to achieve great things throughout the world, right? And really use those mechanics. And having that as one of the lead ways in which the game is sort of portrayed and shown, especially through social media, I think is really interesting. And again, people maybe weren't necessarily expecting it, but seem to have latched onto it. So can you talk a little bit about how that specific approach has sort of influenced the game in all of its different forms, leaning into the sort of speedrunning mechanics mastery, having people respond as seemingly, this seems to make sense, and sort of using that to inform continued development as you march toward the planned release next year?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely part of Fabraz's identity at this point, because all the way back to Slime Sun, we've had leaderboards, because it just meshes so well with these concepts that we're exploring with expressive platformers, where you naturally should feel inclined to want to like get better and learn the layout and basically speedrun. And that's sometimes also the hardest part to convey online, because I think there's sometimes moments where people are like, oh, this game is only for speedrunners. It's like, oh no, absolutely not. But what we're saying is you can't help but want to speedrun a little bit, even if you don't consider yourself a speedrunner, because it just feels fun to do. The game makes you want to do it, and that's, I think, kind of like the main selling point there.
There is a lot of overlap in those types of platformers. Traditionally, you do naturally want to get better at it, go through faster, so it makes sense to naturally lean into that, since that's a lot of people's inclinations anyway.
Yeah, and one big thing that we did now that we introduced that I think also really helps with that flow is that one thing we noticed with Demon Turf is what oftentimes happens, people would play through a level, they would see the time, and they're like, I'm not a speedrunner, but I'm going to try one real quick. And then they try this once, twice, but suddenly they've been speedrunning for half an hour trying to get the better time. And they don't realize it yet, but yeah, you kind of are a speedrunner now. But then what we notice oftentimes is that once that clicks, they check the leaderboards. They're like, how the hell did that person get that first time? It's like impossible. And that's a problem we identified, because then the only way for you to find out is to Google it and hope you find a YouTube video of them recording it. So what we introduced is ghosts basically for the leaderboards, meaning that any entry in the leaderboard, you can see a recording of their ghost, just like in a Mario Kart game, going through the level. And so that means now when you ask the question, how the hell did they do that? You can just click a button and you can see it and you can try to mimic it. You can literally follow that ghost and then either realize there's no way, or suddenly you find maybe other ways to optimize that route, right? And so it becomes a communal, very easy thing without having to leave the game, which I think is really fun.
That's wonderful. Clearly a lot of thought going into those mechanics, and that level of engagement with the title keeps them coming back for more.
Right.
It's hard to ask for more than that. So in terms of where you go from here, obviously still a fair bit of development left for the title and coming toward the back end of it, I imagine. Very different sort of cadence and level of focus on different things than there is when this project is more formative and it's sort of, toward the front half of it. So can you talk a little bit about what's next in the next few months for Bubsy 4D's development, where you're currently at, things you still need to do and take care of? What's that look like for you?
So I think Jason mentioned it already. I'm not sure with you, but in general, back at PAX West, but like we are content complete. The game is completable and playable from start to finish. And we're basically now just in the polish and bug fixing phase. We're now trying to just make it as shiny and good as we can, which means just a lot of quality assurance, play testing, and fixing the gajillion things that don't work, because that's video games. They're fragile. What I like to say is like they're a house of cards made out of glass. That's the fragility of video game systems. But it's coming along great. Every week when we do some more playtesting, we realize how much further it's coming along. And I'm just really excited about it.
To go a little deeper on that, maybe. that, seemingly the hardest part of video game development is that last 10% of finding, that level of polish, that level of optimization and bug squishing that really can define so much of how people experience a title.
Yeah.
So when you get into that phase of development and now having multiple titles under your belt that have gone through kind of a similar set of processes, what are some of the kind of maybe interesting under the hood moments or challenges or elements of that polish process that people may not necessarily know about or understand from a non-development perspective?
There's a lot. I mean, probably the hottest topic right now, because it's so prevalent in releases, is performance. There's been a lot of games recently that have been getting really bad reviews because the performance just isn't it. And I think it's partially because in the moment, a lot of AAA is trying to push certain boundaries that most people's hardware just cannot handle. I think there's even I'm not going to go into it, but I think from our data that we've collected, a lot of people update their GPU but never update their CPU. And if you don't, there's going to be a pretty bad disconnect. But basically, performance is a big one that one has to take very serious and make sure that low-end PCs that haven't been updated since 2015 can hopefully in like the low end, like lowest settings, still perform. That's a big part. And the problem and that's the reason why I wish people would give devs a little bit more slack with the stuff, is that performance optimization is a wrecking ball process. It basically means you're destroying your system, you're rebuilding it from scratch. All the other things that were relying on that system don't work anymore, and you retroactively rebuild everything on top of a new foundation. It is very painful. So the earlier you can start that process, the better, but that's a big one. And then the other one is just that when you are bug fixing, I wish there was a linear process where it's like you have 10 bugs, you fix 10 bugs, the 10 bugs are gone. But it's not. You fix one bug, 5 new ones appear because you fixed that one. And you do that kind of whack-a-mole for a while. And it can be deceptively lengthy in process as well. So the last 10% of the remaining 90% is a very true statement.
House of cards made of glass.
Yes, exactly.
something like that. And it's especially interesting too, because if I recall, the game is due to support an incredibly wide array of devices and consoles and platforms. So I have to imagine the optimization process and needing to account for, and while a lot of this has been standardized, especially compared to many previous console generations, there have to be specific, platform-specific quirks that you have to be aware of. And with the game casting such a wide net, I'd imagine that's a challenging process too. So can you go a little bit deeper on what the process has been like to go after support for so many of these different platforms? Again, a lot of kind of similarities and shared foundations given the tech underneath. But what is it like trying to wrangle so many platforms at once, basically? It's
crazy. I mean, back when we released Demon Turf, we handled all ports except the PlayStation 1. And that was a lot on us. Thankfully, Atari is, again, being super supportive. So they are helping with the porting process. And so most of the console ports will be handled by a third party. So basically, our main responsibility is just to make sure that the foundations are good, that the porting process is easy, and that everything is nicely documented, so that there's no lingering questions of like, oh, how does this work? How can we make that work for this platform? And there, of course, our multi-platform experience will help a lot, because we know a lot of the snags and little things that can pop up.
Wonderful. And then kind of on that same token, when is your release window for Bubsy 4D, and what platforms are you targeting?
So platforms, we're targeting Switch 1, Switch 2, Xbox Series S, Series X, PS4, PS5, Xbox One as well, I believe. GOG, EGS, and Steam. I think I got them all.
I was going to say deep breath.
Yeah.
with this list, I know it's a long one.
In terms of window, we don't have anything announced past just next year.
Excellent. Alrighty. Well, Fabian Fabraz, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks.